Hi, everybody. Welcome to another geopolitical analysis video. Thanks so much for tuning in. We have lots of things to unpack, but before we start, please subscribe, like, and share this video. Comment below. I love to hear some feedbacks from you guys as we venture into the world, right? Lots of things to unpack. This live update will have as an agenda, we will focus on Qatar and what has happened with the whole European scandal there and its importance. Secondary, we will just look at the over macro conditions as we're entering into Christmas here. So, the world is nothing like it used to be 3 years ago or even 10 years ago, to say the least. Uh, it's very different in regards to the international relationships and the contingency and groups that are forming. We're entering a world where the multipolar positioning is taking place before us at a rapid speed. News come in so fast that really indicate us the change of contingency, especially if we consider the fact that the US dominance, the sphere of its dominance, is breaking off into pieces, into smaller blocks. Now, if you will, before we enter into this whole Qatar situation, let me just point out that more countries now have trade agreements with China than ever before, and less countries are now having agreements with the US. Why is that? Well, for starters, the foreign policy of the US has failed to deliver, and the international community is really disappointed, and there's been a mistrust placed based on the way how the US has been creating this entire monopoly. We see in the West, and especially in Europe, there are more voices that are standing up and saying no to the military industrial complex of the US that is forcing Europe into a war that it doesn't want to enter. And the war of in Ukraine is an indication of that. As we know, Boris Johnson and the Biden administration pressured Zelensky not to negotiate with Putin, but to wage on war, risking the life of millions and, of course, affecting the economies and the market, increasing the premiums, etc., etc. But wherever there is business to be made, follow the money. And this is the motto and the theme of this video. Follow the money so you unpack and realize what is going on. So now let's enter into, aside from the dramatic fiscal stimulus of COVID lockdowns, the central banks that we've discussed in our previous videos, and of course, the economies that have been affected from this, the bankruptcies, the recessions that we're talking about, and the reversal of the labor markets from the high point right now going into higher unemployment numbers is something critical. But let's walk into the FIFA World. The FIFA World Cup has had lots of scandals, from human rights violations with the workers dying in horrible conditions, but also different possible bets that were placed by Qatar. And of course, Qatar doesn't care about the World FIFA, neither does Russia. But there are scandals associated with them bribing different officials and trying to create a narrative that is more friendly towards Qatar and Russia, right? And this leads us to the European scandal of bribery of these MEPs, these European Parliament members who essentially received money as it was a form of lobbying, but it took an extensive it took this extensive turn where not only was simple lobbying taking place, but we saw that there was a lot of money laundering going on, and different members of the parliament were also opening up NGOs and around artificial intelligence and doing things that not only had caught the attention of the Brussels, the Belgium international intelligence agencies, but also investigative journalists who were uncovering that there is a lot of influence of Qatar in Europe right now. But why is that? Why does the Qatar care about so much of Europe? Well, for starters, Europe is one of the largest consumer markets in the world, right? Very diverse and access to a lot of technologies. So Qatar obviously wanted to have entry. But let's take a step back to uncover this entire bribery that was been going on for months and months and months now. Ever since the Ukraine war happened, Europe went into this death spiral where the energy crisis and a lot of other illnesses, so to speak, of Europe started surfacing up. So because of the war, the energy crisis became apparent. And when the Biden administration stepped up with the LNG sources to provide to Europe, we saw that the Biden administration at that time went to Qatar and said, hey, you guys are a Western ally. We would like you to be able to provide now at a time of crisis to Qatar, right? LNG, liquefied natural gas, so they can endure the coming months. Well, what Qatar said was, we cannot provide you short-term natural gas because, plain and simple, we're giving to the Asian markets. We have contracts and we have responsibility towards the Asian markets. So what we can do, though, is provide you with long-term contracts in order to make sure that you have natural gas. So look at this cunning attitude. Europe is in need here. It's like, you're thirsty. You know, I have water. I have lots of water that I'm giving out to everybody. And you're like, I need some water right now. Could you give me? I'm willing to pay you for even on a higher price, premium price for this. And Qatar is like, no, you know what? I'll let you be quenched, parched, and dying. But I can assure you, but in the future, I'll give you water. So what's the point of that, right? What's the point of having that? That shows you the scope, the level of exploitation to the nth degree. And Qatar is very infamous for that, for a lot of scandals and a lot of behavior that is unsavory towards Europe. So we're seeing now a contingency form. Qatar, Azerbaijan, Turkey, and Russia. But I want to make clear to you that what is the relation between Russia and Qatar? You might think they're opposite on the map. What are the relations? Well, let's take a look. Let's take a look at one of Russia's largest companies, one of the largest energy companies in the world, actually, Rosneft, right? So Rosneft had a very scandalous past because up until May, the ex-chancellor of Germany, Gerhard Schroeder, was part of the executive board. So can you imagine the German politician, right? Chancellor, not a random position, but a chancellor is part of the executive, a supervisory executive board member of Rosneft. Can you imagine how scandalous this is? It's as if saying the ex-president of the US joins Sinopec, the Chinese energy company, in the executive board. Crazy, right? The level, the magnitude of how scandalous this is. And it's only after, because of Ukraine, he stepped down in May. But guess who comes in to fill his shoes? Well, it's the Qatari supervisory board member whose name is Taib Belmandi. Taib Belmandi has executed in the Qatar energy firm for many, many years, has experience. But it's not just that you see the connection between Qatar, and you're thinking, how does a Qatar guy enter into Rosneft? Well, the Qatar fund, the investment fund of Qatar, QIA, I believe is the name, the acronym, has invested and has shares 19.5% of Rosneft. It's not a small position, 19.5%. Now, Qatar has invested billions into Russia. So we're seeing here a contingency, a block that is pressing and exploiting the European energy crisis. And how is it that these MPs, and it shows you these members, these parliamentary members, did not do their research? Because how do you say we block the Russian imports because they invaded Ukraine, right? And they're revisionists and expansionists and yada, yada, yada. And we make connections to the Soviet Union, et cetera, et cetera. But we allow the strategic partner of Russia to enter Europe, right? The hypocrisy in this. It's like saying the US has, and let's be honest here, the US has its main competitor in the world is essentially China, right? At least that's what we're being presented to. So China has its best ally. Let's say its best ally is Iran, which Iran has some dealings with China. And US blocks and sanctions China, but starts doing business with Iran. Meanwhile, China is sending its goods and Iran is repackaging its goods and selling them to the US. How dumb does the political administration, the political establishment look in the eyes of the world when you're blocking one country's imports, which is an act of war? Sanctioning is an act of war, right? It's an economic, financial war. You do this, but then you accept the highest, the biggest strategic partner of Russia, Qatar, into the game. It's a shame. It shows you how low the European Union has come to. There's no homogeneous strategy here, and there are failed tactics that are falling like dominoes. So this house of cards is collapsing in front of our eyes. And this is one aspect of it. And Qatar, let's talk a little bit about Qatar. Well, Qatar is one of the largest exporters of natural gas and other goods, but primarily it's the energy sector, right? And we see a coincidence with Turkey. Turkey, the only reason why it's afloat right now, despite its long percentage of inflation and its stagnation of resources for its own people, is an export powerhouse, such as Russia. Russia is one of the largest export powerhouses. Metals, you have energy, you have other goods such as petrochemicals that a lot of the West relies on, fertilizers, etc., technologies, defense, missiles, what have you. Yet Qatar is the one that funds Turkey as well. Qatar is the investment bank of this contingency, where you see the funds being moved to Turkey, because you can see the Turkish ETF you'll see in the stock market is parabolic, is going high up like that. It's crazy. You'd think a country that is entering into hyperinflation would be tanking, right? No. Their ETF is parabolic. Why? Because Qatar is funneling money, truckloads of money, into Turkey, because Turkey is a very significant pawn of the Qatar foreign policy, which is to undermine the Saudis as much as possible and the rest of the Arab states. So in this case, we see Qatar funds money into the Russian markets to support as well its war, but also Qatar is the Trojan horse for Russia in order to transport its goods and potentially back to Europe. So you see this backdoor deal. Where did we see this and where did we examine this before in the past? Well, Iran. Iran did the same thing, which had smugglers imported US dollars, gold, etc., oil. And sorry, not oil, because it's one of the exporter of oil, but smuggling these dollars in gold in order to make transactions through a lot of Russian accounts in the SWIFT payment system because they were banned, right? So we see the story again and again and again. And it's very interesting because that's why I wanted to do the introductory with you guys about the multipolar world, the contingencies that are forming here, where we have also Azerbaijan, who which has a lot of human rights violations, crimes against humanity, especially with what's going on with Armenia and in Nagorno-Karabakh, right, against the Christian minorities, which Nagorno-Karabakh is actually, I believe, a larger Armenian majority. Of course, it was the Soviet Union that gave Nagorno-Karabakh to Azerbaijan. But anyways, the point here is that that contingency that is forming is highly anti-European, but it is benefiting and trying to penetrate the Euro markets now that it is weak. So you might ask, why? What is the significance of this? Why is it important? Well, it's important to see that the power dynamics, the power structures right now are being toppled, and that we're entering into a world that is very, very volatile. So the reason why I do these series for you is to elaborate a little bit more on this volatility and how things will progress in the coming years. Just like we said that we want to digest some of these issues that transpired, and expect the unexpected, for lack of a better expression here, because essentially what we're seeing is that also Germany is siding with that contingency. So you might ask yourself, what is the purpose of the European bloc, the EU? Germany has a multi-year contract now with Qatar, right? So you have to ask yourself, why is Germany always going against the European interests here and is seeking its own? Why isn't it the EU? Well, the EU always had as a locomotive Germany. Germany was the locomotive of the EU. And as it had cheap costs, its manufacturing goods were able to be supplied around the world and be competitive. Now, without that cheap energy, it is facing a major deindustrialization phase. And we're seeing a huge emphasis in the military. So Khalid Al Thani, who is the Prime Minister of Qatar, he is the one behind also Al Jazeera. Now, Al Jazeera covers a lot of topics, and we will notice that those countries that are not part of that contingency, you will see a lot of coverage about scandals. Meanwhile, the Qatari scandals are muted. Qatar, Al Jazeera doesn't mention anything about it, about the deals that were going on, the lobbying that was going on, and the multi-million dollar bribery that was going on with a lot of MPs that were caught. So the question goes back to this: where is the European leadership? There are no strong European leaders. There are no strong diplomats, no brokers of democracy in this world sphere right now. We're seeing an extensive push to maintain this wear and tear war that is costing the lives of up to 100,000. And we're seeing that the military-industrial complex is continuing this profit. You can look at the stock market. You can look at the Lockheed Martin stock and see its parabolic rise ever since the Ukrainian war happened. Why? Well, because the U.S. has been sending a lot of its weapons, a lot of military. And there's a lot of talk that they're boots on the ground from the U.S. just wearing the Ukrainian flag on their uniform. We can't confirm this, but there are a lot of allegations that this is going on. So the Eurogroup, which is unconstitutional, which doesn't really have an electorate base, doesn't really have people who are elected by the people, right, dictate policies that are catastrophic. And it's very sad to see this. And we're coming to a point where this volatility is costing not only lives in the present, but is painting an oblique future for many of us young people. One thing I want to mention is Iran, and how Iran is very concerning, because I see multiple fronts opening due to the Ukrainian war. A lot of expansionists and revisionists are coming to the surface right now. And Iran is one of those countries where we're seeing continuously Israel and US conduct joint exercise, almost telegraphing that, hey, we're about to do this, prepare yourself. And this is also a way of telegraphing to the world what will go on, and perhaps to the markets. So it is very interesting to see what's going to happen in Iran, because if something goes off, then the Straits of Hormuz can close, which Iran has a lot of navy, a lot of its military that is in the Indian Ocean. So if the Straits of Hormuz, which I've been personally to the Straits of Hormuz as a maritime officer, so if those close, then you have to expect another volatile situation, which is going to affect the prices like a roller coaster, right? So lots of heavy topics to unpack there. I hope that all of you enter Christmas and New Year's with positive news on a personal basis. But when we're looking at the macro, we're seeing a lot of things that are indicating to us that we're going to go through a very volatile and crazy year. So expect the unexpected. And my message to a lot of Europeans is that brace for the years to come, because this winter might not be as bad as the coming winter. And we have to decide on what kind of leaders we want in the parliament, what kind of leaders we want to exercise our fundamental rights, which is us deciding the future that we want, and them as instruments executing on that. So I hope you enjoyed this session. There are a few other topics I wanted to get into. I wanted to get into how China repackages a lot of the Russian oil that distills it and sends it back to the West, and talk a little bit about the housing market bubble that seems right now to go into this sort of deflationary process. Sales in Canada have dropped. Sweden is in a hot mess. UK as well. So we're seeing a lot of restructuring. And China also is going through restructuring on a supply chain because of its socioeconomic issues that is challenging her China. So a lot of things here to uncover. Overall, what I want you to hold in mind, that Qatar and Russia are alliance, are strategic partners, and there's a contingency that is pressing on Europe to exploit the situation right now. And we're seeing that this volatile situation is going to have one country rise up, take leadership. Germany has lost the leadership of the EU. France is prominent to step up, but France, as we know, is always at the front of the Anglo-Saxon alliance. The US, UK, and the AUKUS always have France as the executioner. And I say this because France has the strongest military, arguably the strongest military in Europe. It's an energy powerhouse, especially with its nuclear technology. And in this case, many other countries within that are going to take a very important stance, namely Greece. Greece is at the crossroads of a very important mission. And as we know, Greece always delivers. Although it's a country of few, it's a country of many hearts. And the history that shows time and time again, Greece delivers whenever it has a protagonistic role to play, especially on this crossroads that it is in the Eastern Mediterranean as well, where you have so many interests that lie. So this connects us to a lot of the natural reserves, the discovery of natural reserves in Greece. That has been a hot topic for many decades, especially south of the exclusive economic zone of Crete, south of that. So what we can anticipate is conflict of interests, from large contingencies, and hopefully what we see is a proper leadership from the European Union to make sure that it doesn't collapse into chaos. Thanks so much for watching, guys. If you like the video, share it around. Please subscribe. I try to do my best to do research for you and myself to uncover the truth. A lot of complicated topics, but I hope I gave you a little bit of more understanding of what's going on. Thanks so much. Bye for now.